In this next bull market, where do you see Bitcoin? What's the range you see Bitcoin topping?
We could potentially be looking at the next cycle high, the next bull market high right now. For me as a technician, I'm going to start to accumulate heavily on Ethereum if, you know what, a good trader will change their view based on what the charts and the data is telling me.
Today, I interviewed trading expert and 20-year veteran Gareth Soloway, and we discuss what comes next for Bitcoin. What's your next price target for Ethereum? Is the housing market about to crash? But before all that, Gareth, what are your thoughts on the state of investing today in general?
Yeah, so I mean, in general, you have the stock market that's had a tremendous run since October of last year. It's starting to show cracks, though, right? Apple missed earnings or they fell on earnings. Nvidia's kind of been holding up the market, you could argue. Microsoft's kind of rolled over. We've seen Bitcoin and crypto start to kind of come down off of its recent run. And so these are things that I do pay attention to, and it's momentum that's stalling out. And eventually you run out of buyers, right? So at some point you have to have a correction. The question is it still within the bear market or is it a bull market? And that's really what we're trying to figure out. Now, you know, when I look at the charts, I look at history. History is really what gives me my basis. And if we go back to past cycles on Bitcoin, it wasn't unusual to see a 100% or more bounce in Bitcoin, even within a bear market. So it makes me a little skeptical. I also think that price action is one of the best indicators. And what we can see here is this was the BlackRock spot ETF news, and it had a big move, and it couldn't break out above this 32,000 level. We then got the news on Ripple winning the case or predominantly winning the case against the SEC. It stalled and couldn't break out. We then just recently got the news on GBTC, the judge found in their favor, and it popped, and we've done a full retrace already. So to me, when I view that, it's price action, and it's telling me that the bounces or the pops are getting sold into still, and that's a warning sign, at least in the near term.
If you zoom out a little, I'm seeing higher lows.
Yep.
I guess we just broke that, but is that signify the break of the broader trend you're saying?
Yeah. So in the near term, right? So there's bull markets within bear markets. There's what we would refer to as micro bulls within a macro bear, the macro being the big, micro being the bull. And so there's no doubt that we've been in a micro bull market with a low, higher low, higher low. And even here, we still haven't taken out this low yet on Bitcoin. So you could still technically say it's a higher low if we turn around here. So that in terms of technicals, this is something, a huge thing that I'm watching is, do we take out this 24,800 to 900 level and actually make a lower low? Now, if we flip over to the Ethereum chart real quick, one of the things to note is that Ethereum did make a lower low. Here's your last low, and here's a lower low. So we see that as you go further up the risk curve, meaning that Ethereum is riskier than Bitcoin, you know, Polygon, Solana, and the rest are riskier. They've made lower and lower points versus Bitcoin is still barely, but it is holding on to those higher lows in the market. So it is interesting to see that.
So what are your next price targets for Bitcoin?
Yeah, so what we had here was we had this little bearish flag pattern, which then ultimately failed, and we saw a beautiful pop on the back of that news. Now, the fact that we've come back in and retraced is not a good thing, right? Generally, after a pop, you look for sideways consolidation, which is known as bull flagging. It's essentially building energy before the next move. When you come down like this, it tells me we're likely going lower. So in the charts, it tells me 24,800, 25,000 is your next support level. If that can hold, we want to see it bounce and start to kind of bounce up and make new short-term higher highs again. If that fails, then you're headed to 20,000. And if that fails, then we're heading back to 15,700, 15,600 area. So right now, as a technician, and I think this is important to say, is that you have to stay kind of neutral. Whatever the chart's telling you, that's the direction you go. You have to respect support. So I respect 25,000, but if it breaks, then right away I go to that next target of 20,000 as a target price on Bitcoin.
Let me ask you a big picture, more thought-provoking question. Again, different traders would have different answers, but all right, I guess this is just specifically for you, this first part. You've told me in past interviews we've done on the channel that the thing that would get you to change your mind a little earlier in the bullish direction is if we got positive regulation. Now, in the last few months, we saw Ripple beat the SEC. We just saw Grayscale beat the SEC. If, you know, as an investor, I want to be thinking 6 months down the line, not necessarily investing where the markets are today, but where I think they'll be in 6 months. Isn't that the turnaround?
Yeah, so you're partially right in that. So the news we've seen, and I want to be clear for everyone watching, is the news is fundamentally really good for crypto and Bitcoin, right? So these are wins for Bitcoin and crypto overall. They don't change the short-term fear and greed factors, which are what technicals are. So technicals are give you the short-term move. Wins like we're seeing with the SEC give us the fundamental backdrop of a strengthening crypto market. And so once we get through this and we do get firm regulation and we know what is a security, what's not, what are these regulators are asking for, how is Bitcoin going to be regulated, if at all, and then is it become an asset that, you know, pension funds hold on their investment sheets. So these are all things that, whether it's 6 months or 12 months or 18 or 24, those will be really good drivers of the next bull market. But in the short term, there's this disenchantment with Bitcoin and crypto where people honestly, you know, every time they're buying these pops on this good news, they're getting burned. And so there's this almost like a kid touching a hot stove where you touch it once, ow, you touch it twice, ow, you're not touching it again until you see something bigger occur here. And I think that's what's going on here, is that you just don't have a lot of participation. There's obviously the crypto Twitter group who's going to be hardcore regardless, but we need more than that to really turn around price action at this point.
And macro is still a huge, the waves of macro is still affecting crypto in a big way. So thinking of those other markets, the stock market, the housing market, gold, I don't know, what, I guess, concerns you the most, or what are you looking at?
Yeah, so I mean, the housing market's insane, right? Because it's basically frozen. We had a situation, and this I find this fascinating because I don't think it's happened in history, where interest rates went up so fast that people that were in 3% mortgages, it wasn't enough time where they had a chance to get a 4% and sell their current house and get a 4% mortgage, which isn't such a big difference. They went up so fast that those people aren't going to sell their homes and flip into a 7 to 8% mortgage. And then on the other side, prices have stayed so high and interest rates have soared that everyone else who wants to buy a home can't afford a home. And so you have these two sides and no one's meeting in the middle to create a transaction. And that's really what we look for with markets. You have to have a buyer and seller willing to meet in the middle. And there's not that going on right now. So you have a stagnant, frozen housing market. Then you have a backdrop where we're starting to see a little bit of weaker economic news, maybe. So maybe the Fed will stop hiking rates. But the question is inflation too high that they can't lower rates? And that's what the market wants. That's what Bitcoin wants, is that they want that free money flowing again to really get their mojo going. And it's debatable whether or not inflation will be low enough for them to do that. And so there's a lot of things going on here, you know, economically, fundamentally, that are creating issues for Bitcoin. And one of my fears is, could Bitcoin actually make a new low? And I would say that fundamentally Bitcoin's only getting stronger. So you normally, by looking at the data and what we're seeing in the news, you would say no. But then you go and you say, okay, well, what if we enter a recession and that recession causes the NASDAQ to fall 30 or 40%? Is Bitcoin able to hold up in that environment? And I would argue that fear and panic are more pervasive than fundamental news, as we're seeing by these recent pullbacks after these news. And that would make me nervous that we still have the potential to make new lows on Bitcoin before the next bull market starts.
So your message is, guys, I know Bitcoin's been rallying the first half of the year. Mm-hmm. I've been saying 12K is a possibility forever. It's a possibility. Mm-hmm. I was right. It's happening as I predicted. Is that your message?
Well, I'm not right yet because it hasn't happened.
Okay,
but I would say that it's still very much on the table, even though fundamentally I think the news has been amazing for Bitcoin and it strengthens the long term. So basically everything I've seen in the news tells me that Bitcoin's here to stay and the price will eventually go up. So if your time horizon is 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, this is a rounding error at this point, whether it goes down to 15 again or 12 or whatever it may be, you're not going to look back and care whether you got in here or not. If you're someone like me who's a trader, then you're much more concerned with 10, 15, 20% moves in Bitcoin because you're looking to trade that.
Speaking of a recession, which could take all markets down, especially crypto, do you think we're about to see a housing market crash comparable to 07, 08? Because like you said, the Fed has essentially killed both the supply side and the demand side, killed the market.
So I do think when things unfreeze, it's going to be nasty. And the reason I say that is because when things unfreeze, it's going to be because of a couple things. Number one, if you look at how many people own multiple properties that got into the Airbnb game, So as soon as the economy weakens and they're not paying their mortgages by renting their Airbnbs because the economy is too weak, people aren't doing that anymore, then those houses are going to go into foreclosure. And once they go into foreclosure and the economy weakens, interest rates will come down, and everyone who wants to move out of their 3% mortgage house, which again, remember, people don't, it's not that the mortgage, it's not that people don't want to move right now. They just can't afford to. They can't flip a 3% into a 7 or 8%. So as soon as those mortgage rates come down, there will be a flood of people that put their houses on the market trying to get out, and that will create an excess demand, and you'll see a collapse. Now, is it going to be as deadly as what we saw in 07, 08, 09? Probably not at this point, but the commercial real estate, that's another story. That is a horrendous mess. And I know you live in LA, and you see what's going on there with big companies moving out and office buildings empty. There is a lot of dead weight on these banks' balance sheets because of that.
100%. In LA, there's no bigger example. Can we look at the charts, either Bitcoin, the stock market, whatever, but give me sort of a timeline. If this stuff were to happen, where do you see these lows happening? Q4, Q1?
Yeah, so for me, at least, when I'm looking at Bitcoin is I do believe that we'll probably test 25,000 in the next week or two. Once that breaks, you're probably within a month of testing 20, and then I would say by year end you're testing your 15,700 level. So we're really not that far away. I think 3, 4, 5 months, maybe early 2024, from retesting these lows. Once we get to this point, and you're already seeing it, right? So bear market bottoms, they bottom when people get burned so many times that they throw in the towel. We're not there in crypto yet, but you're starting to see where these good news pops occur, and then we see a flush. That's really hurting the psyche of the investor, and that's part of what a bear market does to break your will to make a bottom. So I think by the time we get down to these 15,000-ish lows and we break that, that should really be the culmination final dump out. Whether we get to 12, whether we get to 10, I don't know, but ultimately I think the bottom is probably put in by early 2024 in Bitcoin, and then we'll have to see if the halving starts to have that impact where we start to see it go up. What do we see about that? But yeah, I think that for me is really important. And then if we look at the S&P here, the S&P 500 is still relatively near its highs, right? So here's your 2022 highs in October, and look at the rally we've been on. But one thing I've noticed is that we had a bigger pullback here. We still have a higher low. So here was your last low. This is still technically higher. So that's bullish. But my guess is we're going to start to roll over and actually make a lower low. And I expect the stock market to start to pan lower as well. And actually, I think by the first, second quarter of 2024, we'll be at these lows in October. And that's really where that culmination of the Bitcoin lows and the stock market lows could come together.
And we brushed over Ethereum. You mentioned it. Can we look at price targets for ETH too? Because like you said.
So yeah, so let me just go into this chart here on Ethereum. And what we could see is Ethereum still holding technical support. Right around 1,600 to 1,650 is still support. It pierced the low, which made it lower low, but it still bounced back above. Now, if you take that lower low out and you take out this area, you're headed down towards 1,375. And then ultimately you're headed down to about 1,100. Now, interestingly enough, I want to show you guys this. There's a head and shoulders pattern here on the chart of ETH, right? So we have a shoulder here. Here's your head, okay? And here's your other shoulder. Now, your break point, this white line was your neckline, which broke, and that kick-started a move down that will culminate. And I want to show you this because this is really cool. You can actually calculate your target on your head and shoulders. So how low should this head and shoulders fall? You take the highest point of the head, drop a plumb line down right to the neckline. So it's 665 points. And from the break point where the neckline gets broken, you do that same drop, 665 points, and basically you're at this target down here. So for me as a technician, I'm going to start to accumulate heavily on Ethereum if I say if, because there's no guarantees in trading, but if we get down to the completion of this head and shoulders, which is what should happen here, I'll be accumulating right around 1,100 quite heavily on Ethereum.
And what if you're wrong? Because I feel like around 20K, everybody's expecting lower lows, and we rallied this first half of the year.
Yep.
So what happens then?
Yeah, so and that's a great question. So what you do is, and let's just go back to Bitcoin. So there's very much defined levels on Bitcoin. So for me, this was the line in the sand that I talked about. Even maybe when we talked last, we were talking about this 31-ish level. If we get above that, then I think that's the culmination saying that, okay, this is a new bull market. But as long as we stay below this level, which was rejected multiple times, then I think for me, at least, I'm in the camp that this is a bear market rally versus a bull market, new bull market.
In our final few minutes, I want to look into next year, past the halving, because as you know, as you mentioned, that's a huge catalyst, cuts the supply faucet in half. In this next bull market, whenever that is, where do you see Bitcoin? What's the range you see Bitcoin topping?
Wow, that's a great question. So for me, I would tend to look at trend lines and going to trend line analysis. And I mean, if we talk next bull market, we're talking fully regulated. Everyone is singing kumbaya, even the SEC, which seems unlikely, but I think it will eventually happen. And I think that you have institutions like BlackRock and hedge funds and pension funds. They're all moving into Bitcoin as part of their portfolio. It's going to be considered part of the diversified portfolio. Having said that, I think what you do is you take this trend line here from the high of 17 to the highs of the 2021 market, and you start looking and saying, okay, that might be a good target price of where price could go. So if we just go like this, and I can extend this out a little bit more, we could potentially be looking at the next cycle high. The next bull market high right now is around 90,000, but I think very likely by that time, this line is a little higher. It's upsloping, so it's probably around 100,000 at that point.
Damn, man, that would be wild.
Yeah. And this is, by the way, just to say this, guys, like, a lot of people say, oh, Garrett's a bear or whatever, but like, I just follow price action, right? It's just like, it's me just looking at the chart, and the chart tells me with slightly good, better probabilities than not, which way things going to go. So, again, when we get in that bull market, I'm going to be a full-fledged bull when the charts tell me to be a bull. It's just until then, I have to remain skeptical.
And by the way, going off that, I heard a trader say once that I respect, trading is not about being right. Trading is about making money, meaning adjusting your position based on what the charts are telling you.
That's right. And I think that's important. A lot of people say, oh, well, he said this a year ago. Well, you know what? A good trader will change their view based on what the charts and the data is telling them. And so you have to be ready. Anyone who stays stuck in their mode and is unwilling to change will ultimately lose out.
Final question, Gareth, and I want to take trading out of this, charts out of this entirely. More of a big picture, just getting to know you. Finish this sentence.
Oh, boy.
I became successful when I understood blank.
Wow. So I became successful when I understood work ethic and discipline. And ultimately, when it comes to investing, position size was the game changer for me. Once I went from putting all my money in one position and hoping and praying to make $1 million, that's where I blew up my account. It's when I started to do the smart way, which is diversifying. That's where I started to make real money.
I love it, Gareth. Links for all your stuff are down below. By the way, I love you and Ben Cowan on the No Shield Zone.
Thank you.
I'm a watcher, so I encourage the audience to check that out. But final thoughts for the Altcoin Daily Army.
Wow, Altcoin Daily Army. You guys have great leaders in the two brothers here. It's amazing. You guys are awesome. I know I get a lot of love from your crew as well, and I appreciate that. And I would just say, remember, crypto will have its day in the sun again. Bear markets don't last forever, so you just have to weather the storm. And again, think about it like building your knowledge. Like, this is the period to think and to learn and to understand so that you can maximize the next bull market to your advantage.